So, chapter 21, we're going to talk about the Industrial Revolution, and then we're also going to talk a little bit about social dynamics and stuff going on in Europe. But this is such a cool chapter for me. And there were several of you, like 5 or 6 of you, that wanted to know more about the Industrial Revolution. So, look for your name on the page. There were a number of you, so I didn't do individual shout outs. But okay, let's get started. So, the rise of roots of industrialization, excuse me. So some major breakthroughs included James Watt's, his improved steam engine. This came around 1776, and innovations in textile machinery like the flying shuttle and the spinning jenny. And if you don't know what those are, Google them and look them up. It's so cool. It's just how we make fabric so quickly now. England led the industrialization due to several key factors: population growth, capital, access to resources like cotton, coal, and iron, and then also social mobility. We have this system, and it's my favorite just because of the name. It's called the domestic putting out system, or proto-industrialization, and that paved the way for factory-based manufacturing. Workers, they do lack protection and resisted job displacing machines. So you can make some comparisons to 2025 to the Industrial Revolution. A lot of people were afraid machines are going to replace me. I'm not going to be able to have a job. I'm not going to be able to provide for my family because of these machines. It's the same thing that we saw happen at Walmart with self-checkout. Oh, I would rather, you're going to hear older people say, I would rather go to someone who's actually physically working than go to a machine because that machine's replaced someone's job. AI is another connection to 2025. A lot of people are afraid I'm not going to have a job in the next few years because I'm going to be replaced by AI. So you're going to see a lot of revolts and a lot of protests against industrialization during this time period, which is kind of cool because we're kind of seeing the same thing happen now with AI. So look for those. And England's cotton industry devastated India's native cloth production. So that's kind of a consequence that we have, right? Engines of change, though, come along. And you're going to have George Stephenson's steam locomotive. It enabled the railway boom of the 1830s through the 1840s. Also, railroads accelerated industrial growth funded by governments and investors. Britain, again, dominated early industrialization. Others like Belgium followed closely, but Eastern Europe really lagged due to serfdom and limited labor mobility. Most workers still alternated between agricultural work and manufacturing. Harsh factory conditions led to the formation of the working class and really some of our early labor unions. Governments investigated these labor issues, leading to early reforms like the Factory Act of 1833 and other limits on child and female labor. And here's a map just to kind of show you the major railroads that come around in the 1830s, and also kind of industry and major industrial areas and kind of where it spreads from there. So industrialization drove rapid urban growth, especially in Great Britain. I mean, look at how connected Great Britain is with railroads, right? Overcrowding and poor sanitation caused major health crises. So there's this really bad cholera epidemic and tuberculosis. And there's another map that kind of shows the historical base of Indian cholera, where its origins and then how it spread to this global pandemic. The middle class lived in better conditions and pushed for moral reforms, fearing the poor's influence. And we are going to see class divisions deepened, raising social tensions. So in population growth during this time, it really outpaced food supply. In many areas, despite land expansion and transportation movements, most Europeans remained really rural, with land ownership still dominated by the elites. Independent peasant life declined, promoting seasonal migration and increased awareness of birth control. Mass immigration, mainly to the U.S., helped revive demographic pressure. So there's a lot of push and pull factors during the 1800s with a lot of people leaving different parts of the world and migrating to the U.S. A push factor example would be the potato famine in the 1840s in Ireland. You're going to see a lot of people leaving Ireland and going to different parts of the world, and we have a huge Irish population that comes into the U.S. in the 1840s and 50s. So there's an example for you. Political power remained with traditional elites, especially in places like Russia, where serf uprisings are going to be suppressed. So what do we do with reforming the social order? So there are some cultural responses. And as industrialization and urbanization accelerate, artists and writers spotlighted social issues under the term the social question. Romanticism, which we talked about in chapter 20, celebrated nature and criticized industrial progress. And Gothic architecture echoed a yearning for those pre-industrial times. Novels became a popular medium for social critique thanks to rising literacy and serialized publishing. And some of those key figures are like Charles Dickens. He exposed poverty and urban hardship. You have Charlotte Bronte and George Sand, who's pictured here, highlighted women's societal struggles. We also have a lot of cultural venues that are starting to really make their presence known and starting to be built and enjoyed, like public theaters, museums, even photography. Spread access to art and really fostered this working class solidarity with artists. Some social reform movements that we see happening also in this chapter, like religious reform movements, motivation, spurred charitable initiatives like Sunday schools, hospitals, and efforts to combat prostitution and alcoholism. Education. Britain and Prussia advanced primary schooling. France mandated school for boys. Remember, girls kind of pushed to the sideline. It was optional for girls to go, but really with Napoleon and restricting women's rights, right? Russia restricted peasant access to school. Governments attempted moral regulation, like really banning blood sports, reforming welfare. And one example is Britain's 1834 poor law, or the workhouses, though that often faced a lot of backlash. And then gender roles were reinforced. Public charity roles for women, but domestic ideals confined most women, especially middle class, to the home, limiting their economic and political participation. Okay, let's get into some of the colonial abuses and reforms that are discussed in this chapter as well. I'm going to highlight the series of maps that are also in your book during this little section. So this era saw a shift from colonialism to imperialism. European powers moved from direct to indirect economic and political control. The slave trade declined. Britain ended it in 1807 and then ended slavery altogether in 1833. France abolished slavery in 1848, though Atlantic slavery persisted elsewhere. Guys, where else did it persist, right? The US, Brazil, Latin America, we still see slaves coming into the far west. European expansion intensified. France is going to colonize Algeria and Tahiti. Britain annexed Singapore, New Zealand, and expanded influence in India. And then Britain's opium trade triggered the First Opium War. This is 1839 to 1842, ending in the Treaty of Nanking, granting Hong Kong and opening Chinese ports. So nationalism, let's talk about ideologies and political movements. And this is something that a couple of you wanted to talk about as well. These competing ideologies. Sarah, you were one of them. And Andrea, this kind of gets into maybe some of that age of empire that we're going to lead up to. So nationalism. Nationalism claimed identity based on shared language and culture. Sometimes it does ignite conflict when nations overlap, archaic empires. In the multi-ethnic Austrian Empire, Mazzini, he founded Young Italy, pushing for Italian unification. In Germany, we saw a customs union that is formed as a step toward unity. In Poland and in Ireland, nationalists organized, but they face a lot of oppression. And then in Russia, we see some of those rejecting Western influence in favor of traditional Russian values. Liberalism, it's rooted in Enlightenment thinking. And liberalism emphasizes individual liberty and free markets. It resonated really strongly with the rising middle class. Reforms included Britain's repeal of the Corn Laws after lobbying by the Anti-Corn Law League. Continental liberals focused on constitutionalism, facing censorship and repression, but organizing reform efforts in places like Hungary and Russia. Repressed liberals continued meeting in informal circles, though rulers like Nicholas I is going to start to crack down on those, like in Russia. Socialism also emerged as a response to class inequality, calling for societal reorganization beyond liberal capitalism. You have utopian socialists like Robert Owen, who designed cooperative communities and supported women's emancipation. Industrial workers also formed cooperative trade unions and mutual aid societies, and women played key roles in these radical socialist movements. You're also going to see the revolutions of 1848. They're kind of happening everywhere. Famine and crop failures, notably Ireland's potato famine, and high prices triggered widespread social unrest, leading to food riots, mass immigration, and worker discontent. It's not just in Ireland, though. Like, we see this in Russia, right, and in other places in the 40s. France's February Revolution, so in 1848, there's a protest and that forced the king to abdicate. The new republic introduced abolition of colonial slavery, universal male suffrage, and national workshops for the unemployed. Women are also going to protest against workshop closures during the June days. We have uprisings happening in Italy and revolts across Italy. We also have in Central Europe, there are some revolts. And then kind of the aftermath of those revolts are, Prussia and other German states retained constitutions and parliaments. Britain, aided by early reforms, avoided revolution. Russia remained authoritarian under Nicholas I. Feminist movements were suppressed across Europe, and many activists, socialists, liberals, nationalists went into exile, kind of waiting for their moment, hopefully in the near future. So there is a ton of stuff happening in chapter 21, but really we're only looking at 4 learning objectives for this chapter: to analyze the causes of the Industrial Revolution and explain why it took place, when and where it did. Already told you when and where. Describe the impact of industrialism on European societies. Distinguish between the most important ideologies of early 19th century Europe and identify the dominant characteristics of each. And then evaluate the successes and failures of the revolutions of 1848. Here are those learning objectives for you laid out along with the you should watch for chapter 21. This one is about the Industrial Revolution, and then the second one is about the revolutions of 1848. Then also here are all the assignments for chapter 21.